Warning: this content may be disturbing and is not suitable for viewers under 18 or those sensitive to fear-inducing material. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please do not watch. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The couch. There's a particular kind of excitement that comes with furnishing your first apartment. It doesn't matter how small the space is or how mismatched the furniture ends up being. It's yours. Every lamp, every rug, every throw pillow is a declaration of independence. That's exactly how I felt when I moved into my studio in East Columbus, Ohio at 22 years old. I had a mattress on the floor, a folding table I'd stolen from my mom's garage, and about $400 left in my checking account. What I didn't have was a couch. And in a studio apartment, a couch isn't just furniture. It's the living room, the dining room, and the guest bedroom all at once. I'd already struck out at every second-hand furniture store within 15 miles. The prices were either laughable or the condition was worse than what I'd find on the side of the road. A friend suggested I try one of those local online classifieds, the kind where private sellers post photos and set their own prices. I'd never bought anything major from a stranger before, but desperation has a way of lowering your guard. I started scrolling one Sunday afternoon, half expecting to find nothing but junk. But then I saw it. A wide, deep-cushioned sectional in a warm charcoal gray. Based on the photos, it looked practically new. Clean lines, no visible stains, firm cushions. The asking price was $150. For a sectional that size, that was almost unbelievably cheap. I told myself it was probably a college student moving out of state, trying to offload furniture fast. It made sense. People do that all the time. The listing gave a brief description. Barely used, smoke-free home, must go ASAP, serious buyers only. And then, at the bottom, a contact email. I remember staring at that email address for a long moment before clicking away. It was one of those old-style handles from the early internet, something with a string of random numbers attached to a nickname that felt oddly specific in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not offensive, not threatening, just off. Like a word you've read too many times until it stops looking like a real word. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Plenty of people have weird email handles from when they were teenagers and never bothered changing them. I typed out a short message, introduced myself, mentioned the couch, asked if it was still available, and hit send. He replied in under 5 minutes. That should have been the first thing I noticed, not the speed itself, but what the response contained. He accepted my offer immediately, no haggling, no questions about whether I was serious, and then, almost in the same breath, he asked for my home address so he could arrange delivery. Sat with that for a minute. The feeling I got reading those words was hard to name. Not quite fear. More like the low-level unease you feel when a conversation takes an unexpected turn and you suddenly realize you don't know the person across from you at all. I wrote back that I'd prefer to come pick it up myself. That seemed reasonable. Most furniture transactions work that way. You bring a truck or a big enough car, you haul it yourself, everyone goes home. Simple. He wrote back almost immediately and said he'd prefer to deliver it to me. I suggested again that I come to him. He pushed back again, politely but firmly. He said he had a truck, that it was no trouble, that he'd even help carry it up any stairs. He seemed almost eager, not in a generous way, but in the way someone seems eager when they want something from you and they're trying not to let it show. I stopped responding. I figured the conversation was over, the couch was gone, and I'd keep looking. A day later, he emailed me again. No mention of the back and forth about delivery. He simply sent me his address and told me the couch was still available whenever I was ready to come see it. I don't know what made me go. I've asked myself that question many times since. Maybe it was the price. Maybe it was the fact that I'd been looking for weeks and hadn't found anything close to what I needed. Maybe it was the very ordinary nature of his address, a street name I recognized, a neighborhood I'd driven through dozens of times. I told myself that if anything felt wrong when I got there, I'd leave immediately. I brought my phone with location sharing turned on, sent the address to my roommate back at my mom's place, and drove over. The neighborhood looked like 10,000 other neighborhoods in central Ohio. Small houses with front porches, older cars in the driveways, a few kids riding bikes in the distance. His house was the smallest one on the block. Not dramatically so, just slightly more. Compressed than its neighbors, like it had been built on a narrower lot. The porch light was on, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. I remember thinking that was odd. I rang the bell. The man who answered the door was somewhere in his mid-40s. Average height, unremarkable build, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low. When he saw me, his face broke into a wide smile. The kind of smile that's slightly too broad, slightly too immediate, like it had been prepared in advance. He stepped back and swept his arm toward the interior of the house, inviting me in. Every instinct I had fired at once. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't one specific thing. Not the smile, not the cap, not the too eager welcome. It was the combination of all of it, arriving at once, and the quiet certainty in my gut that something about this situation was not right. But I stepped inside anyway. I don't say that proudly. The living room was dim, curtains drawn, one lamp on in the corner, the kind of half-darkness that exists at noon in rooms where sunlight isn't welcome. The couch was there, in the center of the room, and the moment I saw it, I knew I wasn't buying it. The photos had been taken from flattering angles in better lighting. Up close, the upholstery was scuffed along the armrests, the cushions sagged on one side, and there were two small tears near the base that hadn't been visible in the listing. I told him it wasn't what I'd expected. I kept my voice neutral and polite. He smiled again and offered to lower the price. I told him I wasn't interested, and I started to move toward the door. That was when he put his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't violent. It was slow and deliberate, and that somehow made it worse. He leaned slightly closer and said, in a very calm voice, that he'd be willing to give me the couch for free, if I was willing to give him something in return. He didn't specify what. He didn't have to. The sound that came out of me was involuntary. Not a scream, more like a sharp exhale of pure revulsion. I stepped backward, moved around him, and walked quickly to the front door. I didn't run. Running felt like it would change something, escalate something. I walked fast and steady, got to my car, got in, and drove away without looking back. I kept my phone in my hand the whole drive home. I didn't call anyone. I just held it. That night, I was lying in bed with the TV on when I heard it. Footsteps on my front porch. Heavy, deliberate, unhurried. I grabbed the remote and muted the television. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something I will never forget for the rest of my life. The slow, careful sound of someone testing my front door handle. Not knocking, not ringing the bell. Testing the handle, quietly, in the dark. I got out of bed without turning on any lights. I crossed the room in the dark and pressed my eye to the peephole. The porch was empty. Whoever had been there was already gone or had moved. A second later, I heard the wooden gate on the side of the house swing open. I called 911. I told the dispatcher someone was trying to get into my apartment. I gave my address. I was still on the phone when I heard the back door handle begin to move. Same slow, deliberate testing. I pressed myself against the wall and shouted, loudly, clearly, that the police were on their way. Silence. Then the gate swung again. Footsteps on gravel, fading, gone. The police came, checked the perimeter, found nothing. Told me to lock my windows and call back if I heard anything else. That was 4 weeks ago. Nothing has happened since. But I sleep with a chair wedged under my door handle every single night, and I haven't slept a full 8 hours since the day I went to look at that couch. I can't prove it was him. I don't have to prove it. There is no version of reality in which that was a coincidence. I never found a couch. I still don't have one. And I have decided, firmly and permanently, that I am okay with that. The car. My son was turning 18 in 6 weeks, and I had one goal: find him a reliable used car without getting completely fleeced. Anyone who's ever shopped for used cars knows exactly how quickly that goal can become exhausting. The major sites, the ones everyone knows, are full of dealers marking up 15-year-old vehicles like they've been personally maintained by engineers. Private sellers are better, but even those listings tend to be inflated, especially for anything Japanese and under 100,000 miles. I'd been at it for almost 2 weeks when I found the listing. A 2003 Toyota Camry, one owner, 67,000 miles. No reported accidents. The asking price was $3,500. I read that listing 3 times. For a Camry with those miles, that price wasn't just reasonable, it was remarkable. Those cars run for 200,000 miles without complaint if you maintain them properly. I knew people who'd driven them into the ground and were still driving them. At $3,500, this was as close to a sure thing as used car shopping gets. The seller lived about 10 miles from my house, which meant no long drives or wasted afternoons if the car didn't pan out. I called the number in the listing. The man who answered sounded completely ordinary. Middle-aged voice, relaxed cadence, the kind of guy who sounds like he coaches Little League and grills on weekends. He said his name was Douglas. He told me the car had been well maintained, that he kept all the service records, and that the only reason he was selling it was that he'd recently bought a newer model and didn't need 2 vehicles. He said I was welcome to come by any afternoon that week to take a look. Everything about the phone call was normal. I wrote down his address, counted the cash I was planning to bring, $3,500, though I intended to offer less, and drove out to his property the following Thursday. The address took me to the outskirts of town, where the houses get farther apart and the driveways get longer. His property was at the end of a gravel road flanked by open fields. The house itself was small, a low ranch-style structure with a detached garage and a lot of flat, open land around it. The nearest neighbor was maybe a quarter-mile away. I didn't think much of that at the time. A lot of older properties out that way are spread out like that. The garage door was open. I figured Douglas might be out there working, so I walked over first. The interior of the garage stopped me mid-step. There was no car, not the Camry, not any car. What there was instead was a staggering collection of car parts. Engines on dollies, stacked transmission housings, rows of disassembled components lining every wall, tires piled ceiling-high in the corner. It looked like the inside of a chop shop rather than a private garage. The sheer volume of it was disorienting. Where did it all come from? Who needs this many parts? The only vehicle on the property was an old pickup truck parked on the far side of the house, rust creeping up the wheel wells. I went to the front door and double-checked the address against the number mounted beside the doorframe. It matched. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Louder. Still nothing. I knocked a third time and waited a full 5 minutes. I checked my watch. I was actually early, not late. Not just on time. Early. There was no reason he shouldn't be home. I called his number. From inside the house, I heard his cell phone ring. I stood very still on that porch and listened to it ring 4 times and go to voicemail. I called again. Same result. The muffled ringing through the door, the voicemail, the silence after. He was home. He wasn't answering. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was in the shower. Maybe he was in the backyard and couldn't hear. Maybe he'd left his phone inside and stepped out through the back. I walked around to the side of the house and looked for a window I could knock on. I found one near what appeared to be the dining room. The curtains were partially open. I cupped my hands against the glass and peered inside. The room was dim and still. There was a dining table, dark wood, old-fashioned, the kind you'd see in a farmhouse from 40 years ago, surrounded by mismatched chairs, a sideboard against one wall, a doorway leading deeper into the house. And then I saw him, or what I thought was him. Standing at the far end of the room, near what I assumed was the back door, was a figure, a man. He was standing completely still, facing away from me, looking out toward the backyard. He was wearing dark clothing. He didn't move. I knocked on the glass. He didn't react. Not a flinch, not a turn of the head, nothing. I knocked harder. Nothing. I told myself he must be hard of hearing. I told myself there was an innocent explanation. I walked around the back of the house. There was no fence, no gate, just open yard, and approached the back door. What I saw when I got closer stopped every thought in my head. The figure by the door wasn't a man. It was a human form, shaped like a man, sized like a man, dressed like a man. But it was mounted, fixed in place. The posture was too rigid, the stillness too absolute. The skin, I don't know what it was made of, I didn't stay long enough to understand it, had the quality of something preserved rather than something alive. It was a taxidermied human figure, standing upright, positioned at the back door of this man's house as though it had been placed there to look out at something or to watch for someone. I don't remember making the decision to run. I just remember running. I cleared the side of the house, hit the gravel driveway, and got to my car in seconds. I got in, turned the key, and looked back at the house once before pulling away. The window I'd looked through, the dining room window, had its curtains pulled closed, tightly, all the way, except for two of the slats, bent apart at eye level. Someone was standing at that window watching me leave. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and didn't slow down until I hit traffic on the main road. My mind kept cycling through the same inventory, all those car parts, no Camry, the phone ringing inside the house with nobody answering, the figure at the door, the figure in the window. There was no car for sale. There never had been. The listing was bait, and I had driven myself out to an isolated property and walked right up to the door and looked in the windows like I was doing a tour. I don't know what Douglas, or whoever that man was, had in mind. I don't know if I was supposed to come inside. I don't know what was supposed to happen next. What I do know is that I came within one open door of finding out, and I have never once gone back to look at a private listing without bringing two other people with me. My son got a car, eventually. I bought it from a dealership. I paid more than I wanted to. I didn't care even slightly. Word count this section. Approximately 1,390 words, Part A. The phone. I want to be careful about how I tell this story, because it's the kind of story that sounds, in the retelling, like a series of bad decisions. And I suppose, looking back, some of them were. But I also think that anyone reading this who says they never would have done the same thing has never been 19 years old and excited about getting a deal. My younger brother, Marcus, is one of those people who knows everything about every piece of consumer technology ever made. You name it, he knows the specs, the known issues, the common workarounds. So when I decided I wanted to upgrade my phone and found a listing for a barely used smartphone at $200, roughly half the market value, I called him immediately. "I'll come with you," he said. "Don't hand them anything until I've had a chance to look at it." We arranged to meet the seller in the parking lot of a diner just off the highway in Trenton, New Jersey. The seller had suggested a few different locations, and we'd picked the diner because it was public, it was well lit, and it was close to a main road. We got there around 9:30 at night, parked under a light post, and waited. Two men pulled up in a dark-colored sedan, both large, both wearing dark clothing. They got out of the car slowly, looked around the parking lot in a way that didn't feel casual, and walked over to us. The one who did the talking pulled the phone out of his jacket pocket and handed it to Marcus without ceremony. Marcus turned it over, checked the exterior, popped out the SIM tray, slid my SIM card in, and spent the next 2 minutes running through his checklist: calls, messages, camera, wireless connection, speakers, screen sensitivity. He handed it back to me and gave me a small nod. "It works," he said quietly. I offered the original asking price, $200. The seller looked at the bills, looked at me, and said he needed $250. I told him I'd only brought $200. That was a lie. I had the extra $50 in my back pocket. But I'd read enough about these kinds of transactions to know that sellers sometimes quote a lower price to get you to show up and then raise it at the exchange, counting on the fact that you're already there and you've already committed. I wasn't going to reward that. The seller wasn't happy. He and his companion exchanged a look I didn't love, but he pocketed the money, and they walked back to their car. Marcus and I got into mine. I called my girlfriend to test the phone. I was relieved. The whole thing had taken maybe 8 minutes, start to finish. "They haven't left," Marcus said. I glanced in the mirror. The dark sedan was still in its spot, engine idling, no movement. "They're probably finishing a conversation," I said. I pulled out of the parking spot and onto the road. The sedan pulled out behind us. I told myself it was nothing. We were both leaving the same parking lot. We could be going in the same direction. Lots of people drive the same stretch of highway. Every turn I made, they made. Marcus stopped talking. We both watched the mirror. The car stayed close, closer than normal traffic flow, closer than coincidence. "Pull over," Marcus said. "Absolutely not," I said. I didn't say it unkindly. I said it because I knew, the same way you sometimes just know things without being able to explain them, that stopping would be the worst possible move. If they needed something legitimate from us, if we'd somehow shorted them or there was a problem with the transaction, they would call. They had my number from the listing conversation. They could honk. They could flash their lights. They were doing none of those things. They were just following. Close and quiet and deliberate, the way you follow something when you don't want it to notice you're there. We'd been on the road for almost 20 minutes at that point, and every turn I made they shadowed. I started varying my route, turning right when I would have turned left, taking side streets, looping back on myself. They stayed with us. My hands were tight on the wheel. Marcus had gone completely silent, which was somehow worse than if he'd been talking. I made a decision. We were approaching an intersection with a four-way light. The light had just turned red. I could see cars beginning to move from the crossing direction, but they were still 50 yards back. There was a window, narrow, closing, but there. I floored it. Marcus grabbed the door handle and said something I can't repeat here. We cleared the intersection. Behind us, the light was fully red. The sedan sat at the light as cross-traffic poured through. I watched them disappear in the rearview mirror, and I didn't breathe properly again for another 5 minutes. We took the long way home, 45 minutes on a drive that should have taken 15. Marcus didn't speak the whole time except to give me occasional directions when I'd turned myself around. When we finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a minute with my hands still on the wheel. "We're good," Marcus said. I nodded. I went inside. My parents were already asleep. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the phone I'd bought and thought about whether the savings had been worth any of that. I'd nearly convinced myself. The answer was yes. I went to bed around midnight. Part B. The knock. I was still awake at 1 in the morning, lying in the dark with the phone balanced on my chest, setting it up the way you do when you have a new device, connecting accounts, adjusting settings, transferring saved information. The house was quiet. My parents' door was closed. Marcus was asleep in his room down the hall. That's when I heard the car doors, 2 of them in quick succession. The particular sound of car doors closing on a quiet residential street in the middle of the night is very different from the same sound during the day. During the day, it's background noise. At 1 in the morning, it lands like a signal. I moved to the window without turning on the light. The dark sedan was parked across the street. I don't know how long I stood at that window. Long enough to confirm what I was seeing was real. Long enough to understand that they hadn't gone home, hadn't given up, hadn't moved on. They'd followed me home, slowly, carefully, waiting until I thought I was safe. And now they were outside my house. I went to my parents' room and woke my father. He is not a man who wakes up groggy. He came fully awake in seconds, sat up, and listened while I explained everything in fast, low sentences: the parking lot, the drive, the sedan, the window outside. He stood up, went to the closet, and came back with a baseball bat. He moved to the front of the house and crouched low beside the door. The knock came about 2 minutes later. Hard, deliberate. 3 slow strikes. My father's voice was completely steady when he told them to leave. One of the men on the other side of the door said he had a weapon. He said if my father didn't open the door, he would put a round through the lock. My father told me to call our neighbor Marcus. Not my brother, but a man named Marcus who lived 2 houses down and had been a law enforcement officer for over 20 years. I called. He answered on the second ring. I told him what was happening. He said to stay back from the door and that he was already moving. Then the shot came. It was quieter than I expected. A suppressed sound, more of a sharp crack than a bang, but the effect was immediate and visible. A hole appeared in our front door, roughly at chest height if you were standing, but my father had been crouching. The bullet passed through the door and embedded in the wall on the far side of the hallway. My father moved away from the door. We pressed ourselves against the interior walls and listened. Marcus's voice cut through from outside, loud, authoritative, commanding. He was identifying himself clearly, telling them to put down whatever they were carrying, telling them to get on the ground. There was a long moment of complete silence, then compliance. The sounds of movement, of objects being set down, of the particular stillness that follows when a situation is no longer in progress. My father went outside. I followed as far as the doorway. Marcus had both men on the ground on our front lawn, face down, hands behind their heads. He cuffed them himself and called for backup. Patrol arrived within 5 minutes. They were arrested that morning. I don't know what ultimately happened to them legally. I was never called to testify, and the details of what charges stuck didn't filter back to me. What I do know is that they came to a stranger's house in the middle of the night with a suppressed firearm over a $200 phone transaction, which tells you something definitive about what they'd had in mind from the beginning. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. Not just the obvious terrifying parts. The shot, the door, my father's head 2 inches to the right of where that bullet went. But the small moments before any of that. The moment in the parking lot when I handed over the cash and told myself the look they exchanged meant nothing. The moment on the highway when Marcus said to pull over, and I knew without knowing why that I was right to keep driving. The moment I almost went to bed without looking out the window. What I keep coming back to is how ordinary every step felt in real time. Finding a good deal online, meeting a seller in a public place, driving home, getting ready for bed. Nothing in that sequence feels dangerous. Nothing in that sequence announces itself as the night something nearly went catastrophically wrong. It just feels like a Tuesday. I still have the phone, as a matter of fact. I considered getting rid of it, but I ended up keeping it. Some part of me wanted a reminder that certain decisions have weight, even when they don't look like they do. That the difference between a story you tell later and a story no one gets to tell can be something as small as which way you were crouching when a door took a bullet.